because I believe underneath the skin we still preserved this kind of sensitivity. Hello everybody, welcome back to the Current Art Podcast. I'm Yaching, and it's so nice to have you back. Happy New Year, everybody. I wish you have a fresh start of the new year. I'm not particularly good at giving New Year wishes, so I'm going to try. And at first, I wish you would have such a successful new year. I know it's a very conventional one, it sounds like a treadmill oblivion speech, but what I really want is no matter is the things you want to achieve, it's like smaller or bigger, I hope you get what you want in the new year. And second is like, I hope you will be so healthy. As I get older, I realize that being healthy is not a wish, but it's a plan. It's sadly a boring plan. Yeah, it's the little things that we do every single day, like the things we took to kind of trying to achieve some sort of like mental and physical balances. And the third one is I hope you will have a lot of time to spend with your loved ones. So anyway, I feel like when I look back on 2024, it wasn't particularly a very smooth year. It was very difficult from the month 1 to the December, and at the end, I feel like, wow, I finally survived 2024 and hooray! Yeah, so it's over. And I felt this kind of difficulties has been carried on to the new year because I feel like I'm hitting a creative plateau. Particularly in the late 20s, I find it wasn't an easy time. While you're trying to figure out all the logistic questions and problems you have about the job, about your artistic career, maybe also about your study, but at the same time, you feel like, oh, I've had enough experiences, practical experience of the things I learned. And I want to make something. I want to have a solid foundation, solid concept that I can discover like for extending period of time. So whenever I hit some sort of plateau, the first thing I do is I will try not to engage in too many socialization because I realize I need time to think, and that kind of thinking process only happens when I'm in an isolated environment, when I'm alone. And the second is I try to get a new perspective of the problem that I'm facing. So because of that, I decided to dedicate my time for this weekend in reading and learning about a little bit about art history from the book called Ways of Seeing by Berger. So this book was also made into a TV series on BBC. So it's a 4-episode BBC series. Berger, the series was made in 1970s, but I still find there's a lot of connections about how we see the images and how we see visual references and our problem today. And what I really like about Berger is his book or his narration about art is not academic at all. It is very empirical. It's coming from the empirical experience that he has. So it made very comprehensive for the viewers. Anyway, so I will try to express what I learned. I will try to summarize everything that I observed this weekend. And I hope it's also going to be inspiring for you. Of course, I'm going to combine with my own experiences because I like it a lot when a particularly knowledge or particular theory can add on to our living experiences so they are not isolated. Anyway, John Berger started his book from talking about European paintings from 1500 to 1900, all the way to talk about advertisement in publicity. So what is this very interesting connection? And the first part, he was talking about the massive reproduction changes our way of seeing of the paintings or of the images. So imagine if 20 years ago, I live outside of New York City, I want to see one of the masterpieces and one of the paintings from Van Gogh. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a train to the MoMA Museum and go to the ticket counter, buy the ticket, go into the elevator to the fourth floor, waiting in line, and voila, I'm in front of the painting. So nowadays, instead of going on this pilgrim journey, the images are traveling to us, to our screens, and to our books. But our living condition is more complex. Imagine I opened my iPad in my bedroom. There's like 100 apps in my iPad. And the last minute, I could be seeing, browsing some clothes from my favorite shop online. And then next minute, I'm seeing a video from Palestine. And now I'm looking at the Venus from the painter Botticelli. All of those fragmented knowledge, information, the things we are seeing, the things surround us, have an impact on what we are seeing right now. And John Berger particularly reminds us, like, the information, how to interpret the painting, the right of that is always held in the hands of art experts, art curator, historians. So we are receiving mediated information, and then as to say that our viewing experiences is not direct anymore. And that really reminds me also from my experience last year that I was in Madrid. I visited this very famous museum called Museum Nacional del Prado, because inside there one of my favorite Dutch painters' work, my favorite work from Hieronymus Bosch, which I wanted to see in that museum. So I traveled all the way to be able to stand in front of that painting for half an hour. And nowadays, it became so easy for anybody to use any kind of visual imageries from the past. And all of those like mediated and manipulated information doesn't provide us a silent environment to experience that painting anymore. So from my own creative journey, I realized silence is always a very powerful tool, no matter it's in everyday life or on stage or in the art space. And silence also became one of the rare things that we experience. You think about when you are on a train, you're either with your earbud listening to some music, or you're like hearing the traffic passing by you, overhearing somebody is talking about something. So silent moment in such a metropolitan complex environment is very precious, and it's also very powerful in art creation because of, imagine how many mediums are available to us. Nowadays in a performance, you can have orchestra, you can have moving image, you can have projected image. So the way we can influence our spectators has multiplied, from the sound to the visuals. So I realized this kind of silence, when we offer to the audiences, is kind of a powerful tool, but it's also a very democratic tool, because I give my audience the freedom to let them interpret what is in front of their eyes without trying to manipulate how they should feel about one particular work. And John Berger keeps on talking about the European tradition of presenting the female bodies influences how we see like female nudity and our images today. I had a very interesting experience in the US. It's like, I love sauna and bathhouses. But most of the sauna that I've been to in the New York City, they require to wear swimming suit. So I couldn't be naked. And I was talking about that a lot with friends because I used to live in Germany, and I know most of the saunas, they are textile free. So you have to be naked. And I feel like being naked is not being seen as such a sexual thing. And it shouldn't be a sexual representation of some sort. And so with all the questions that I have, the things I'm thinking about in my mind, when I was watching the second part about the ways of seeing, John Berger talked about the passiveness, like how the depicted female was lying in certain way that is not presented as nakedness, but rather as nudity. So in his book, the nakedness has a very different meaning than the nudity. Nakedness is I choose to be naked. That is combined with my own consciousness, that I'm aware my body is being revealed. But nudity is not. Nudity is being put on a display. And John Berger used a very charming way or interesting way of talking about nudity. He said, nudity is another type of skin that you cannot take it off. And of course, when people are talking about male gaze, there's always this power dynamic of female body as a being watched object. So I quoted him with this sentence, a woman is always accompanied except when quite alone, perhaps even then by her own image of herself. And he particularly emphasized on the self-examination, self-envisage of females' own imageries. And for me, I can also relate it to that. When I was growing up, my mom used to be very concerned about how do I present myself to the public. So she would give me the comment like, oh, I feel like you put on some sort of weight. And I know it's very typical Asian like parenting thing to say, oh, you don't look good enough to be presented. And I felt nowadays we must look at this gender theory or gender power dynamic a little bit different, also with cautious, but a little bit different. Because when John Berger was presenting this theory or his point of view in 1970, like most of the things about this power dynamic he talks about is in a heterosexual relationship, in a cultural context of European culture. But I realize nowadays that we are having a more dynamic relationship with each other. I'm sure non-binary doesn't exist in 1970. Maybe it exists, but the concept hasn't been formed. Well, I feel like when we are trying to create any kind of radical change, what we are going to do is not, we are saying, from today now on, I'm not going to massage myself. I'm not going to self-examine myself. I'm going to smash all the mirrors in my room, and I am not going to be viewed in any way. From now on, I'm not taking any selfie anymore. But I'm thinking about that, how do we create more dynamic in the rigid system? I found very interesting about this book and about my understanding about this book is we are even in a more dangerous state of being that like what surrounded us is not only imageries anymore, but it's kind of a artificial environment. In the next chapter, John Berger was talking about oil painting as a particularly method to create like imageries for tangible objects. And that means that especially the bourgeoisie's classes of like their belongings has been like massively depicted. You can imagine there's like a painting from Holbein in 1533 called The Ambassadors. Like two middle-aged men dressed in fancy fur coat and surrounded by all the inventions from all over the world in a very luxury room. And everything that you can see from the painting has been like detailedly depicted. And that's not only showing like their status, but also showing that the world is their furnished apartment. And because everything in that picture, in that painting, has been worked by the weavers and the carpet makers and the goldsmiths, tailors and jewelers, and then from the hands of the painters. And so, and nowadays, I feel like in our society, there's always this tendency of like materialize the imagery that we've seen on the internet. It became a living experience anymore, and whatever we can see it on internet is not, it's not only a imagery can influence our psychology, but it has been made into reality. I remember during COVID, I saw one of the trend on Chinese social media that so many girls in Shanghai, like one of the big city, 20 of them, they would gather together to go to a hotel and rent a room because they want to take turns taking fancy pictures in that room. I feel like there are opportunities and possibilities to create those luxury, fancy facade in nowadays society. So the ways of seeing has came into reality became the ways of being. The last part is John Berger talks about the publicity. You are what you owned. So it talks about advertisement that using our anxiety about the money and also he was talking about all going back to the fragmented information. When we open the magazine, that what we are seeing is not only like advertisement, but it's conjured up with also the news, the realities in the world. And it's really hard for our mind to grasp what is real anymore. You can see a fancy perfume advertisement on one page and flip to another page, and you see a Bangladesh refugee news, and there's like this huge gap in the reality and those public imageries that has been made to trick us to spend more money or to be living in the dreams that we might envy. John Berger particularly talk about that there's a gap in between our self and a future self, that the image made us to be unhappy about the present moment and to always be envious about that ideal version. So the ways of seeing, it seems to come into the reality. Now there's more technologies or more material resources that we can make this capitalized reality came true in everyday life. Anyway, I really recommend you to go to take a look about this book, Ways of Seeing by John Berger. But also I wish that I can always find some space to create my own thinking, like really deep thinking about my own environment, like how do I situate myself in this complex, manipulated environment. And I know it's not always easy. It's always easy to say anything like that. But I do think it's important to find that very powerful silent moment, because I think art creation is never about making like that amount of effort that you can achieve this powerful message and deliver to your audience. It's always about how deep that you can get about one particularly thought and a expression. And so I have to remind myself to believe in sort of like humanity, because I believe underneath the skin we still preserved this kind of sensitivity. I think it's just taking the time. As people in their late 20s, it's just taking the time to get where you're going to. And it's also taking the time to deliver that message underneath the skin of the audience and talk to their heart. Anyway, thank you so much for watching and listening. I will see you next week. I'm available on YouTube Podcasts, YouTube Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Pocket Podcasts. And see you next week. Ciao, ciao. Happy New Year.